It's a great pleasure to have the inaugural for Professor Carolyn Greig today. I've got a little ditty written by Carolyn, and I'd like to share that with you. So Carolyn is a physiologist and a translational scientist with an overarching interest in responsiveness of human muscle to use, disuse, atrophy and aging. After graduating from Newcastle University with a BSc in physiology and then an MSc in human and applied physiology from King's College London, Carolyn initially worked with young athletes on a Sports Council funded PhD. Her interest in muscle function in older adults began with her first postdoctoral position within the University Department of Geriatric Medicine at the Royal Free Hospital, London. Carolyn then moved to Edinburgh and took a break from her research career. When she returned to research, it was again in a Department of Geriatric Medicine, but this time at Edinburgh University. She obtained a fellowship from the Research into Aging, now Age UK, investigating the responsiveness of healthy older muscle to exercise training. During this time, Carolyn also worked with older adults living with diseases and conditions associated with muscle loss, including stroke and cancer. After 10 years at Edinburgh, Carolyn moved to the University of Birmingham Sport and Exercise and Rehabilitation Sciences Department in the MRC versus Arthritis Centre for musculoskeletal aging research. She tells me she manages the commute very well. Her husband tells me he gets to look after the cat. Carolyn's major interest includes the use of exercise and nutrition interventions to counteract the adverse functional consequences of sarcopenia. Sarcopenia being a term used to define age-related loss of muscle mass and function. As well as interventions theme co-lead for the MRC versus Arthritis Centre, she is deputy lead of the Institute for Global Innovation's Aging, Frailty and Resilience theme. She has undertaken a number of national and EU policy projects involving older adults and served as a member of the UK Chief Medical Officer's Physical Activity Panel for older adults. Recently, with colleagues Janice Thompson and Vicky Goodyear in Sport XR and Eduardo Ferrioli at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, she has developed a massive open online course, a MOOC, titled Healthy Aging, Concepts, Interventions and Planning for the Future, in order to share knowledge and expertise on healthy aging research globally. It's a great pleasure to introduce Carolyn today, who is going to tell us about 4 years and then. Carolyn.
Thank you, Laura, for that lovely introduction. It's very nice to see you all here today. Welcome to those of you here in person and those of you who have zoomed in. It's lovely, and it's also quite terrifying to be standing here in front of you, sharing my scientific journey. But before I do, I want to highlight the problem that's informed much of that journey. Some of you will be familiar with the expression 70 years and 10. A score is a word that means a group of 20, and 70 years and 10 means 70. And life expectancy at birth, the year I was born, was 70. It's actually increased now by quite a bit. It's increased, if you're a woman, to 80. And that's over 40 years, as these data show. But the problem is that our healthy life expectancy, sometimes called our health span, is not keeping up with lifespan. There's disparity, and that means that many older people may have to endure a number of years of poor health. And at the moment in the UK, that stands at 16 years for a man and 19 years for a woman. So think about it. If you're a woman, you may have to spend the last 2 decades of your life in poor health. And that's a real cause for concern. And so much of my research career has focused on the functional consequences of older age, and in trying to find ways to improve functional ability in older people. Functional ability meaning the ability to perform your normal everyday tasks and activities that are important for an independent life by improving muscle health. And I'm going to tell you more about that later, but let's start at the beginning of the journey. So I was and am a great beachcomber. Here I am with my little sister. And I was an avid watcher of Jacques Cousteau on the telly. And I wanted to be like Jacques Cousteau, a marine biologist. This isn't Jacques Cousteau, this is my Uncle Bill, pictured here with my aunt. And Bill encouraged me to go to university. Despite having spent his childhood and lots of his growing up years in a TB hospital, he went to university. He was the first member of our family to do so. I was the second. And he lectured in social policy at the University of Newcastle. Bill encouraged me to read about science. And this is one of the books he gave me, The Art of the Soluble. I was a bit older than the child in the picture. Written by Sir Peter Medawar, who was Nobel Prize winner for medicine the year I was born, and who was here for a few years at the University of Birmingham as a professor of zoology. You'll see below a little newspaper cutting I've had for a long time. This is Sir Peter writing in his book about scientists. And you can't read that, but I'm going to read it to you. Scientists are people of very dissimilar temperament, doing different things in different ways. Some scientists are collectors, classifiers, and compulsive tidier-uppers. Many are detectives, and many are explorers. Some are artists, others are artisans. Some are poet scientists and philosopher scientists, and even mystics. In later years, he added to that by saying, if only I had thought to add, and just a few are crooks. I wanted to be a scientist and meet all of these different types of people. And I can tell you that I haven't been disappointed. So I went to Newcastle University, a land of, Newcastle's in a land of angels, bridges, big running events, and a fabulous coastline. And I graduated from this building, the Armstrong building, not with a BSc in zoology, which is what I had gone to study, but a BSc in physiology. And I graduated with the group of people that you see on the left and in the center there, some of whom have stayed lifelong friends, and I know that they're listening this afternoon. So hello to you. Unusually at the time, for an undergraduate physiology program, we had a small block of exercise physiology, and that really fired my interest in studying responses to exercise and to other environmental stimuli. So I went to London after my first degree to do a master's in human and applied physiology at King's College. It was a wonderful program. We got to meet leading experts in many different fields. And it was certainly learning by participation. We were centrifuged, compressed, decompressed, subjected to heat stress and cold stress. You can see me in the center there in very cold water. I'm not smiling because I'm happy. And again, met some lifelong friends. Trish Dolan, who is a leading expert in spinal biomechanics. Marco Nerici, you could see on a bike there, for those of you who are into muscle physiology. And for those of you who are into environmental physiology, the chap with the little red circle around him, Mike Tipton, MBE, who seems to be more interested in discussing the merits of ironing than listening to the tutorial that's going on in the submarine. It wasn't a real submarine, it was a simulation of one where you could you could manipulate inspired CO2 concentration. Thanks, Mike and Carol, for coming all the way from Cornwall to be here today. The aspect of the MSc that I was most interested in was muscle physiology. Are they my muscle fibers? Yes, they are. And so I did a PhD after that, funded by the Sports Council. Force Generating Capacity of Human Muscle was the title. The PhD also involved some work looking at the nutraceutical value of a compound called carnitine on exercise performance. I was a participant in my own study. That child on the cycle is me. And interestingly, we found small and inconsistent effects of carnitine supplementation, although quite a literature around carnitine has built up since then. And with respect to older adults, it's interesting that carnitine does seem to have an effect on frailer older adults rather than healthier older adults. As part of my PhD, I worked with people that I had met during my MSc. And one of those people was David Jones, who was head of school here in Birmingham, head of Sport XR for a number of years. But at that time, he was working at the Rain Institute, which was part of UCL. And the head of that Department of Metabolism, was Richard Edwards, who was internationally known for his work in muscular dystrophy and muscle metabolic diseases. And he introduced the needle biopsy technique to the UK. Other people in that department at the time, for those of you who are interested in muscle physiology or work in muscle physiology, are names that you might recognize, such as Di Newham, Michael Rennie, Malcolm Jackson. It was quite a lively unit. And a young PhD student called Olga Rutherford, who's sitting right in front of me. And one of the things that Olga showed in her PhD, which is really interesting, was when you train younger people, you see a disconnect between the changes in muscle size and the changes in muscle strength. And I want you to keep that in your minds, because this is going to pop up again later. After my PhD and a couple of years of lecturing, I did my first postdoc at the Royal Free Hospital School of Medicine, again in London. And this was where my research into aging kicked off. And I worked with an inspirational man called Archie Young. Archie was professor of geriatric medicine at the Royal Free. He was a man of many talents. He competed for Scotland in the 1970 Commonwealth Games. He was a swimmer, but he was also a runner and a climber. You can see him here at his own inaugural, and he's demonstrating a weightlifting technique. And the slide behind him is showing that older weightlifters, fantastic as they are in terms of their human performance, were weaker than their younger counterparts, which tells us that there is a certain degree of inevitability about that loss of physical performance as we get older. I believe that it was Richard Edwards who showed Archie how to do needle muscle biopsies, and you can see a photo of him doing one just down there at the bottom of the screen, a biopsy on me, which I was going to show you. It's a film, but I don't think I will. I changed my mind. And here's Archie looking very grumpy, sitting in a bath of very cold water. And we were looking at the effects of temperature on muscle power output and proprioception. And a number of members of my family and friends, I think, also did that experiment. Not the most pleasant. At the bottom right, you see Archie in his later years with Dr. Susie Dinan-Young, an exercise practitioner and a tremendous translator of research findings into practical benefits for older adults. Archie sadly died in 2020 at the beginning of lockdown of Lewy body dementia, and he's greatly missed and he was a terrific influence on my research, and still is. And Archie was one of the first people to characterize that loss of function as we age in terms of crossing thresholds for physical independence. And this is a schematic that I use quite a lot. And it shows you that as you get older, as you go through adolescence and early adulthood, your physical fitness and your function increase, and then they start to decline. And they can decline to a point where you reach what's called a threshold for independence, where the minimum requirement of the task exceeds your maximum capabilities. This is a simplification, and trajectories of aging are quite complex. Whether physical activity actually changes that trajectory is an interesting topic of debate. But whether it does or it doesn't, you're starting off from a higher point in terms of function. So this chap here, who's a hill runner, is going to take him much longer to get to a threshold for independence in performing a particular task or activity, maybe like getting up from a chair or climbing onto a step, compared with this hip fracture survivor who may be just hovering above a threshold. And it's not hard to see that if you get that bit older, or you're off your feet for any reason due to illness and activity, that could be enough to tip you across that threshold. And then performance of a task or activity becomes really difficult or even impossible to do by yourself. You may have to get someone to help you. And if that's getting up from a toilet, then that can severely compromise physical independence and even quality of life. And Archie and I were really interested in exploring, we wanted to explore this relationship between fitness and functional ability in older age. And we recruited a PhD student called Dawn Skelton. And Dawn's a force of nature. She's now Professor of Aging and Health at Glasgow Caledonian University and has done so much work in the field, and also in the field of exercise for falls prevention. And this is just an example of some of the work that Dawn did. She was looking here at the relationship between power output, measured using this contraption, which was brand new, state of the art at the time, and the percentage of a group of adults, older adults, who were able to step up steps of varying heights. And so what she found was that she found a significant correlation between functional ability and power output, but was also able to identify thresholds. So below a power output of around 2.1 watts per kilo, some of the group are starting to be unable to do that. And that, not surprisingly, drops off much faster when the task gets harder, when you're trying to climb a higher step. We're also interested in the effects of training, so if you make an older person stronger through strength training, for example, can you improve their functional ability? Can you improve their ability to do strength-related tasks and activities that are important to them? And the answer is yes. So if you look at the left-hand side there, this is response to training in a group of older people. And you can see that with respect to some tasks and activities, there are significant improvements, but not others. And that's probably because the fitness function relationship is not a linear one. So it depends where you are in that relationship. So let's just say if you're down here and you get a bit stronger, you'll see an improvement in function. But if you're up here on the plateau, you may improve in fitness, but you don't see an improvement in function. The task or activity may feel easier to do, but that's much more difficult to quantify. And so I was really interested in training and the trainability of older people. And I came back to that after a few years. But first I took a career break. And so I'd already met Stephen, who is the kindest person I ever met. And the little uns came along. Lottie and Ali. And they're not so little now. And so I spent a few years out of research looking after them. And then I was fortunate enough, after a fairly long career break, to go back into research. By this time, we'd relocated to the University of Edinburgh, sorry. And I went back to work at the University of Edinburgh. So you can see here on the top left, this is the Royal Infirmary, the university itself. I've thrown in a picture of Carlton Hill. We live at the bottom of Carlton Hill. A little picture of someone's brain. Ali won a competition. What is in my head? I sometimes wonder what's in my head, Ali, and you won that competition. And it's actually a good reminder that muscles are innervated by nerves. And the primary cause of loss of muscle mass in older age is a loss of motor neurons and motor units. I don't know if you can read this, but Ali writes, all these bits of the brain, they're all working for the person, which I think is lovely. Anyway, here's another picture of Archie, because by this time in Edinburgh, Archie had moved back to Edinburgh and he was professor of geriatric medicine. So I got to work with Archie for an extra few years. And I also worked with another geriatrician and stroke physician called Gillian Mead on studies of exercise after stroke. And that was my introduction to clinical studies and clinical trials, along with Dave Saunders, who's a lecturer at Edinburgh. And Archie and I also recruited Claire Fitzsimons as a PhD student, working on these and other projects. And Claire's done really well, and she's now a lecturer at Edinburgh University, researching the effects of intervening to reduce sitting time in adults and older adults. And the group here on the far right, I'll tell you about in a few minutes. So I went back to work to research and got a fellowship from Research into Aging to look at the responsiveness of healthy older muscle to training. And so I trained groups of older and younger women at the same relative exercise intensity and measured their strength and measured their muscle size. And so found that both older and younger women got stronger, but the response of the older women was blunted compared with young. And similarly with muscle size. So we were using magnetic resonance imaging to measure muscle size, and we saw very small changes in the response to training in terms of muscle size. And these older women, it's actually really hard to get an older muscle to grow. But the good news is that you can make it stronger. And the reason that you can make it stronger is due to this plasticity in the neuromuscular system. Physiologists love measuring things. That's what we do. And I have a particular interest in imaging. And you can see on the right-hand side as a dynamic, as it's happening, MR scan of the thigh. It's just tracking up from the knee up to the hip and then down to the knee again. This is a bit like my colleague and friend Steve Harridge's "Not That CT Slide Again" slide. This is my "Not That MRI Slide Again" slide. I show it quite a lot. If you look at the left-hand side, so you're looking at you're standing at someone's feet and you're looking at their head. And when you get halfway up their leg and cut through the thigh, that's what you'll see. And you'll see these muscles on the front of the thigh. These are really important muscles called the quadriceps, the knee extensors. These are the muscles that can get you up off a seat, off the toilet, onto a step, etc. But what you might notice in this older muscle is there's quite a bit of marbling in here. There's quite a bit of fat. And I was very interested in trying to quantify how much fat was there and how much actual muscle was there, how much contractile tissue was there. And so I was very fortunate to work with this remarkable man, Carolyn Greig, who is an MR physicist. And now there are different imaging techniques that one can use that can separate the muscle from the fat. But in my case, I'd already taken these scans. So I asked Callum if there was some kind of post hoc analysis that he could do to separate and quantify the fat. And he did. And what he showed was that in older women compared with younger women, there was a good bit more fat in the muscle. In fact, 15% of that area of interest that we're calling muscle wasn't actually muscle at all. And we also did some studies in older patients with upper GI cancer and found that up to 20% of that area that we call muscle wasn't muscle. And this is quite important. It's quite important to be able to account for the amount of fat that's there. Otherwise, it is difficult to interpret effective interventions on muscle size and muscle quality. Those studies with men and women with upper GI cancers, upper gastrointestinal tract cancers, were done with this man, Ken Fearon, who was professor of surgical oncology at Edinburgh University, and who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And I was able to bring my knowledge and experience of measuring function and muscle size, etc., to these studies of this group of patients. And this is just an example. This is showing you, this is age on this axis and knee extensor strength in newtons per kilo on this axis. The red and the blue symbols are surgical cancer patients. So these are at the beginning of their cancer journey. They're listed for surgery. They're quite high functioning. But look at how they rate against the black and the white symbols, which are the healthy age-related reference values. Even the younger of them are below their age-matched norms, and they're also below a threshold. We applied these threshold principles here as well. So in this case, this was the strength to be confident of rising from a low chair without using your arms, and see how many of them were below that threshold. So we did these observational studies with these patients, and also quite a lot more imaging. And Ben Tan, who was a clinical research fellow at the time, and who's now consultant upper GI surgeon here in Birmingham. Hi, Ben. He used the CT technique, the L3 CT technique. So you take a single slice in the lumbar region, and you can see the red, what's outlined in red there is muscle. And if you measure the muscle cross-sectional area, there's quite a strong relationship between whole body muscularity. And so Ben did this in his observational studies of pancreatic cancer. And another clinical research fellow, Nathan Stevens, he was also interested in imaging and did these this electron microscopy work. And he was actually measuring not the intermuscular fat, but the fat that's actually in the fiber, the intramyocellular fat that you need to do this kind of imaging for. And he found that the amount of these fatty droplets inside the fibers correlated with the progression of cancer cachexia. And cachexia is a syndrome which includes muscle wasting, muscle loss. With Ken, I was also involved in pharmaceutical trials. And I'm showing you this one as an example. This was an early phase trial of two drugs, formoterol fumarate and megastol acetate. And this trial was an 8-week trial in patients who were at the other end of their cancer journey. They had advanced illness. They were very, very poorly. And these drugs, interestingly, with these studies with Ken, these drugs, wasn't chemotherapy. These drugs were not targeting the tumor. These drugs were targeting muscle. And these outcome measures were all muscle related. So megastol acetate was given to improve appetite, and then formoterol had a direct effect on the muscle. And what you see is that there were improvements in these patients with respect to MR measures of quadriceps volume and cross-sectional area, and quadriceps strength and hand grip strength and lower limb power. The physical activity data look a bit like a cat's cradle, but 2 or 3 of these patients responded really well with some really dramatic increases in step count. You'll probably notice that there weren't very many patients in this trial. Quite a few patients did not manage the 8 weeks of the study. They either withdrew due to conditions relating to their cancer, or they passed away. And not very many of them survived for more than a few months after the trial. The trial wasn't optimally designed, and so we have to be careful what we say about efficacy here, but there were signs that not only were this drug combination safe and tolerable, but also signs that they could be efficacious. I'm showing this as an example because of the human element to these trials. This was a card sent to me by one of the patients in this trial who actually responded very well. And he sent me a little note that I've kept. He says, "Things are going well." And it was a very powerful reminder to me of why I do what I do. I do this research to try and help people with age-related muscle loss or muscle loss associated with disease. And so to Birmingham. So I'd been working in Edinburgh for about 10 years, and I saw an advert for senior lecturer in the School of Sport, Exercise and Rehabilitation Sciences. And it was funded through the MRC Arthritis Research UK, now known as Versus Arthritis, Centre for Musculoskeletal Aging Research, bit of a mouthful, we call it CMAR. And I was so glad that I saw that advert. Wasn't sure about the commute, but I do manage it quite well. The unusual thing for me was that the interview panel was 75% women. That was unusual for me. I hadn't encountered that before. And one of those women you see here, Janet Lord, who directs CMAR and is another force of nature. She's an immune biologist by training, but has received various awards and accolades for her work in aging. And it's a great pleasure and privilege to have worked with Janet for all this time. You might be wondering about the flags. So here you see me standing with Professor Cynthia Brown, also from the University of Birmingham, but it's Birmingham, Alabama. And Cynthia and I are in Copenhagen to examine a PhD student. And this particular institution that we were at, they had a tradition of flying the flags of their visitors' countries when their visitors came. And so I can quite safely say this was the first and last time that they literally put the flags out for me. So that was fun. And here I am with some students that I'm going to tell you about in a moment. So while at Birmingham, I have focused very much on interventions to counteract not just age-related muscle loss, which we call sarcopenia, but also the sarcopenia that's associated with disease states. And most of those interventions have been around exercise and nutrition or nutraceuticals, often in combination, because we know that older muscle is not as responsive to the main anabolic drivers, feeding and exercise, as younger muscle is. So there's a rationale for trying to combine interventions to boost that responsiveness. And here are some students who I've been primary supervisor to and postdocs during my time at Birmingham. The most recent student is Sophie Mathewson, who's here today. Sophie's working on protein. So did my first PhD student, Danielle Carden. And postdoc Winnie Chan also working in looking at the effect of strength training and protein supplementation in people who've had kidney transplants. Annika researched the effects of exercise and vitamin D and asthma effects of exercise and caloric restriction in people with osteoarthritis. And I'd also like to mention postdoc Johnny Quinlan, because the reasons often why interventions don't work, and I have to say that you know, trying to do a definitive trial in the lifetime of a PhD is really difficult. So quite a few of these studies have been feasibility or pilot studies. And some of them have shown quite promising signs of indications of efficacy. But we need to do the basic science. We need to look at mechanisms underlying adaptation to intervention, so that we can target the right interventions to the right people. And this is what another postdoc, Johnny Quinlan, is doing. Johnny is part of the NIHR Birmingham BRC sarcopenia theme, and is working on a big project along with Amrit, who I can see, Dr. Amrit Dhaliwal, researching, characterizing muscle in great depth, deep phenotyping we call it, in patients with chronic liver disease, inflammatory bowel disease, and rheumatoid arthritis. They're doing fantastic work and are analyzing these data right now. I didn't mention Natalia in Brazil, who's researching the effects of exercise and fish oil supplementation, but I'm going to come back to Brazil in a few more minutes. I also have an interest in the effects of reducing inactivity. The epidemiological studies show us that inactivity is associated, as in prolonged sitting time, is associated with bad things happening, adverse health effects. And so for some patient groups, reducing inactivity by asking people to sit less may be better tolerated than asking them to move around more. It's a subtle difference. Some people call it exercise by stealth. You're displacing inactivity to low-level physical activity. And this is what one of my former students, Justin Onger, did, and Justin's here as well somewhere. As part of a Marie Curie ITN network, which was led by Anna Whitaker, who was formerly in SportXR, now in Sterling. And Justin did this intervention in patients with osteoarthritis who were on the list for joint replacement. So these patients, these people are really quite immobile and in quite a lot of pain. And therefore, that type of intervention, asking them to reduce sitting time, we thought they'd be more compliant with that. And in fact, Justin did show that reducing sitting time did improve function in these people while they were waiting for their surgery. And I've just noticed that Evans is here as well from the Marie Curie ITM. Nice to see you, Evans. But what about the acute effects of sitting time? You know, as a physiologist, what is actually happening to the body when you sit for just short periods of time? We know, I've just told you that prolonged sitting is associated with cardiovascular mortality and all-cause mortality. But what about just a single period of sitting time? What does that do to the body? And so this is work by Sandra Agipong-Badu, who was a postdoc and now a lecturer in SportXR. And Sandra got older people to come in to the clinical research facility, sit in temperature-controlled rooms, and then before and after different periods of sitting to measure a number of different outcomes. And here you have one of our participants of that study, Jenny, who I see is here today as well, our star. And we were expecting there to be changes in muscle power output. We thought that, you know, just sitting around, the muscle might cool down and there would be changes in power. We didn't see changes in power output. But what we did see, or I should say what Sandra showed, was that after 2 hours, and particularly after 4 hours of sitting, so just one bout of sitting time, we asked our participants not to move, increased systolic blood pressure by 10 millimeters of mercury, and also increased diastolic pressure. So just one period of sitting time with some of our older participants made them hypertensive. And so we don't know what the cumulative effects of that would be, but we do know that prolonged sitting time causes vascular issues. And so there has been further work in the school looking at the vascular effects using flow-mediated dilatation to study changes as a result of acute sitting. I'm going to pop back to Brazil now. See on the far right-hand side here of your screen. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to visit the University of Sao Paulo with some funding from FAPESP to collaborate with Dr. Eduardo Ferrioli, who's a geriatrician out there. And that was on the fish oil and resistance training project to get that started and to support that. But I also ran a workshop while I was there over a number of days, which was accredited by the university. And it seemed to go down quite well. And so Eduardo was very keen for me to come back. Actually, I took Lottie, didn't I, to Brazil? Eduardo was very keen for me to come back, which isn't, I mean, pleasant as it would have been, not very resource friendly. So out of that was born the idea to develop an online course to be able to share knowledge and experience of muscle aging and the functional consequences of aging and responsiveness to intervention, etc. And then that kind of grew arms and legs and turned into, a MOOC. And a MOOC is a massive open online course. And this wouldn't have happened without Janice Thompson, who is another force of nature. She's the force of nature. And Vicky Goodyear with her digital and distance learning and experience of developing MOOCs, and Eduardo as well, of course. And this was quite a task because it had to be designed completely online because of COVID. So this was our big lockdown project, and it was quite a big one. And it was launched last year to coincide with the United Nations Decade for Healthy Aging, which is a global collaboration to improve the lives of older people. And it's had over 1,500 enrollments so far. So it's gone out to learners all over the world. And that's what we wanted. We wanted it to be accessible for anybody who had internet. And it doesn't cost anything. It's free to access. We were aided hugely by the NIHR Birmingham BRC Muscle Health Public Involvement and Research Group, which is facilitated by Laura Chapman, led by Bob Jasper. And here you can see one of the participants, Christine, involved in a focus group. And another one of that muscle health group here is here today. Lena, lovely to have you here. Thank you for coming. Here you can see me at the bottom talking about global aging. And that's what's kind of fired my interest now in global healthy aging research, because by 2050, there will be 2 billion people over the age of 60 on our planet. 80% of them will live in low and middle income countries. And so cue Justine Davies. And Justine Davies is Professor of Global Health here at Birmingham. And Justine also leads the IGI, Aging, Frailty and Resilience theme, which I co-lead. And we're working on a number of projects at the moment. One of these projects involves assessing the needs and priorities of older people and key stakeholders. So what better way to do that than ask them what their needs and priorities are and not assume that we know them. And we're doing this particular project in collaboration with partners from 3 universities, Aga Khan in Pakistan, 2 universities in Brazil, Federal ABC and USP. And this university, the University of Global Health Equity, which is located in the northern part of Rwanda, and quite a remote area. And I was very fortunate enough to be able to go there about a month ago, working with our partners there, supporting them. We're going to support them to write a manuscript, reporting the data from the workshops, and hopefully that will act as a platform, a foundation for future research into healthy aging. And so that's very exciting. So time marches on. We all get older. But what about the future of aging research? And what about muscle research in particular? We tend to work in silos. You know, we don't tend to talk to each other or communicate with each other that much. And we also tend to sort of stick to within our own discipline. So this is quite timely that last year UKRI put out a call for aging across the life course interdisciplinary research networks. And the idea was that those networks would address challenges that are important in terms of aging research, that would encourage collaboration and would therefore enable translation to benefit, to make life better for older people. And 11 different networks have been funded. They're all kind of bubbling away here. But over the coming months, they're not just going to be networking within, between themselves, but also between other networks. It's a network of networks. And I'm very pleased to say that in terms of muscle, the My Age Muscle Resilience Network was funded. And that's, I co-direct that with Peter Smith from the University of Southampton. And I'm also very happy to say that another network I've highlighted in purple, the Attain Network, Physical Activity and Health Inequality Network, which is led by SportXR, was also funded. So I think to lead or co-lead 2 networks from our school out of 11, I think is pretty fantastic. I'm very pleased with that. The onboarding event was only 2 days ago, but there was a lot of enthusiasm and optimism and serious commitment to making these networks work and increase our research productivity in aging. I've mentioned some of the students whom I've supervised and postdocs. These are all the students that I've had a hand in supervising, either as primary or co-supervisor. And the ones in bold are the ones since I came to Birmingham. So it's been quite a productive time. And also we've had funding from lots of different organizations, and you can't do your research without funding. And that's really important. The roll call of people that I've worked with, collaborators, and all the different projects that I've worked on, and all these different threads that have been woven into my career is too long to put on a slide. I've tried to mention some important collaborators and people who've been really key to my research. I haven't mentioned them all, but you know who you are, and I'm extremely grateful and appreciative towards you for that. There are 2 people who I really wish were here today, Anne and Ed Greig. And Anne left school at 15 and Ed left school at 14. And they worked incredibly hard to give their girls the education that they never got. And I owe them a massive debt. And I will be raising a glass to them tonight. So thank you to so many remarkable people who've supported me, my family, my friends, mentors, collaborators, participants, colleagues. These are not mutually exclusive groups. And Yaz and Bill, two dear friends who are listening in today. And these were my best critical friends when I was living in London. We shared a house and they used to make me practice my presentations. This is when we used to use slides and slide projectors. We'd be projecting these slides against the living room wall and going through the talks I had to give for the Physiological Society or for other conferences. And they would take notes and feed back to me. And when I told them about today, Yasmin said, don't forget the impactful start and close it down at the end. So I leave it to you to decide how well I've done that. And I thank you very much indeed for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. She said, you can't cry. And she showed the picture of her parents and I just lost it. Okay, I'll take a breath. Who am I? I'm Professor Janice Thompson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a previous head of school, Sport, Exercise, and Rehabilitation Sciences. I first want to share the apologies from our current head of school, Professor Sarah Aldred. She's really unfortunately couldn't attend tonight. So she asked if I would please do the honor of the closing comments, which I was happy to do. And I've known Carolyn since the day she came on campus to interview for the post here. And I never thought it would be so easy to get an amazing candidate just by taking her for some tea and cake. And she says, I'll never forget that day. You took me for tea and cake. And I thought, doesn't everybody? But I guess not. And she's right. It was almost all female panel, which I have hardly experienced in my life, either on the applicant side or even on the the panel side. So it was an amazing day, and it took us just a few minutes to know that she was the right person to be here. And she's been able to illustrate that beautifully. I love inaugurals because they're joyful, and you get to really see the amazing things that people have done and are currently doing in their journey, which is fantastic. Now, I can't share everything I know about Carolyn because she would not be very happy with me because I share her secrets. But one of the things that she didn't cover that I would like to mention is she's made so many tremendous contributions to the school and the university. But one of the really big ones that I can think of outside of research is her role as the is it chair? Would you call it the chair? Yes, of the what we call STEM Ethics Committee. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's a very large, it's a huge ethics committee for the university. We have two ethics committees. One's on the social sciences side, and this is on the more natural sciences side. And either chairing or co-chairing it is a massive job. And she's been doing it for a number of years now, and she's been brilliant. She's worked together with an amazing team of people to transform it and really take us at an incredibly high level of our ability to ensure that our research is highly ethical, that we are making sure everything is safe, that it's appropriate. And then that also helps us continue to get funding and to publish our work, which is vital. Without ethical approval, if you have issues, you can't publish your work, and then you can't further bring in money, and you also can't help people the way you want to help them. So that's really important. I wanted to highlight that. Now, I won't keep you much longer because you've all been sitting for too long. And as Carolyn has showed you, that is a bad thing. So we're going to get up, and the picture shows you a dinosaur. So if you're not sure what's happening next, we are going to be going to the Lapworth Museum, an amazing facility here on campus, not too far of a walk from here. It's wonderful. There'll be a reception there, a little bit of nibbles and drinks. So please come and join us. You'll love the facility if you've not been there. I've been there so many times, and every time I'm like a little kid again, and I just love it. So please make sure you join us. And I just want to thank Carolyn again. You did an amazing job, and it's wonderful because we're not being judged. We're not being hammered by questions from grumpy other scientists who don't like what we do. We just have a wonderful group of people here to support and appreciate. So Carolyn, well done.